Hi guys, my name's Dav and welcome to D&DGaming. If this is your first time visiting our channel, we provide honest and in-depth game reviews on a wide range of PC games and review them from the perspective of two experienced gamers. We highly recommend you click that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of our up and coming game reviews. If you find you like this review, remember to give it a thumbs up by hitting that like button. With that said, in review this time around is train simulation game Train Sim World 2. Reviewing the game with me is my brother Dale.
Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Train Sim World 2 is a train simulation game developed and published by Dovetail Games. It is the fifth game in the Train Sim World series and was released in August 2020 for PC, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. The main upgrades over the previous games are 2 new routes and several new trains. These include the IC3M and Talent 2, running from Cologne to Aachen, and the London Underground 1972 Mark II stop running on the Bakerloo line. The game also comes with the Sand Patch Grade route, which features several locomotives. So Dav, what were your first impressions?
I guess my first impression from screenshots and video footage was a typical vehicle simulation game. I played a few going a long way back to the Microsoft Simulator games of the late 90s and more recently Euro Truck Simulator. Not much else to say on this really.
Yeah, I figured it was quite self-explanatory from the name, what this game was going to be all about, and I was kind of intrigued as I'd never played a train simulation game. Like you, played plenty of flight simulators and of course Euro Truck Simulator 2, but I figured this is likely to be even more niche than those, and I was right. You can't get much more niche than this. So what are your general thoughts following your playthrough?
Yeah, so unless you're a vehicle simulation game fan, I wouldn't advise getting your wallet out for this one right away. As with all vehicle simulation games of its type, it's really in depth in terms of its control mechanics and train visual realism, but it also comes with some big issues, and I'll go into those shortly.
Yeah, in terms of my general thoughts, I mean, I jumped straight in and started with the London Underground Bakerloo line and followed through the initial tutorial, which was quite useful. First, I was just looking around the cab at all the different buttons and levers, and although I've never been in that actual cab of a 1972 London Underground train, it certainly looked all realistic enough. Most of the buttons and levers could be pressed and pulled as you'd expect with a simulation game, and I think generally they did a good job on the realism side of things. Although even with following the tutorial, I still managed to mess up trying to get the train started the first time round and had to reset everything a couple of times before getting it right. There is a slight learning curve with this game, and the trains require a starter procedure to be followed, but once you've done it a few times, it's easy enough to remember the sequences. I did struggle a bit at first with judging the distances and speed at which to approach the stops and the platforms, but again, with the learning curve, after a few tries, I managed to get pretty good at this. Damn it! So in terms of graphic options are decent enough. At first glance, there seems to only be about 2 options, but there's also an advanced options menu which contains foliage quality, shadow quality, and a few more. About what I expect for a simulation game, as usual the processing power goes into the systems and subsystems, so not bad in this case overall.
Yeah, I haven't really got anything to add to that. Again, I felt it was a bit lacking at first, but then, I could see there were more under the advanced options menu to tweak. So in terms of graphics and graphics performance, well, we'll put our PC specs up on screen as usual, but the game actually ran a bit shit on my PC, to be honest. It was very stuttery and glitchy in its graphics, and I don't know whether it's been optimized particularly well. The textures used in the game are quite flat and blurry as well, and the graphics themselves are not that great. It has a kind of typical simulator style of graphics. As Dale pointed out, some of the processing power goes into the systems and subsystems, but this does mean that the graphics can be a bit bland and a bit basic. I guess maybe it's the textures they use for these types of games makes them all feel similar from a graphic standpoint.
Yeah, I thought the graphics looked okay in general. The cabs look good and the carriages as well, along with the exterior of the trains when you change the camera view. Although some of the visuals in the distance aren't great and you do get some popping in sometimes. I also found the character models for the passengers really aren't very good in my opinion and seem to have very janky physics. When you see them walking around on the platform, sometimes they just glitch all over the place. A couple of times I was put into the platforms at full speed because I was running late, and some of the passengers were hovering so close to the edge of the platform, I thought they were going to fall on the track.
So in terms of player controls, the game controls are quite complex as expected from a simulator game, and they vary dependent on the train being driven. There's a large controls menu to refer to for keyboard shortcut controls, or alternatively you can use the mouse to control switches, etc. in the train cabin for more realism.
I use mouse and keyboard, as you'd expect, given all the different shortcuts, etc., that you use in these simulation games. I mostly use the mouse for switches, such as opening the doors, but the keyboard for controlling the train itself. There are key rebindings available in the in-game controls menu. I'm not sure this sort of game would work great on a controller, but I guess they did manage it for the console versions, so you have that option.
So in terms of general game mechanics, you select a character from the menu when starting a new game. I think there's about 8 to choose from, but they just keep scrolling across the screen endlessly, so it appears as if there's more. You select from the main menu either the American Sandpatch grade, European high-speed train, or London Underground scenarios. You go through a set of training missions for each of the scenarios to learn how to drive the different types of trains. Each mission within the scenarios varies, such as collecting cargo trains and transporting them with the American Sandpatch scenario, driving a high-speed train on a line through Germany to Holland in the European scenario, and controlling the tube trains on the London Underground routes in the third scenario. Each train is highly detailed to reflect real-life trains and controls for driving them. You can also explore the train stations on foot with various minor collectibles to find and mini-missions to complete.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. There's also a livery editor and scenario designer, which were new additions for this game in the series.
So in terms of UI, the UI is relatively basic and provides more of a concise view of the train controls, and it can be quite handy to refer to.
The UI can also be reduced and modified in the menus for a more realistic experience. By default, a fair bit of info is shown on the UI, but this can be adjusted depending on your level of experience and if you want more of a challenge and more realism.
So in terms of sound and music, other than the intro to the game, there's no music in the actual game. This was very disappointing as it was very noticeable and it felt like they forgot to put some in. On the other hand, the environment and train sounds are really good and really spot on. They really do make you feel like you're driving a train and give that authentic feel to the game.
Yeah, I do agree about the lack of music, which is odd, especially just in the menus. But yeah, the train sounds are great and very realistic. It can get a bit boring though, with not much else going on in the way of sounds. There really isn't much variety. You're just sitting there listening to the sound of the train itself.
So in terms of bugs and glitches, Dale, did you find any?
I did have some issues with stuttering at times, and actually fairly often, unfortunately, which from what I read does seem to be a common issue with this game, so I don't think it was limited to my system. Apart from that, I did have an unusual save bug where I'd come to a point in the mission where I basically ran a red light by accident. I had made a save just prior to that, luckily. So I went back into that save and was sitting at the red light waiting for it to change. I could see another AI train in the distance and it literally never moved. Like, it didn't go green. And I was sitting there for like 5 minutes real time. And I got out the train and ran up the platform to see what this other train was doing. Just couldn't do anything. So I get back in the train, go forward thinking, oh, maybe it's going to let me go. And then, no, bang, kick me out the mission because I'd run the red light. So yeah, really weird. And from what I read, there seems to be really unusual bugs like that quite often.
Yeah, I think for me, as mentioned in the graphics section earlier, the game is very glitchy with all sorts of graphical issues. And yeah, I saw a lot of stuttering at times as well. So to sum up, things I liked about the game, it's really authentic in its portrayal of the trains themselves, and it really does feel like you're driving them for real, as a simulator should do. The background environment context, although basic graphically in terms of animations, they really did reflect the locations in which you were and had clearly been well implemented too. The trains did feel very different from one another. From a controls perspective, obviously they all control differently, but also, for example, when pulling a set of freight carriages, it was noticeable how different this felt to drive the train and pull the weight compared to the high-speed trains pulling train carriages full of people.
Yeah, in terms of things I liked, I mean, if you want the experience of driving a train without doing anything illegal, then this is the game for you. Equally, if you're a train spotter, you no longer have to be judged by other people, as you don't even have to leave the house anymore. In all seriousness, this does feel like a realistic take on driving a train. It was great getting to mess about with all the different switches in the cab, and the trains do have a good feel to them when accelerating and braking, and the physics generally. I like that as you went through the scenarios, the routes got longer and more varied, such as having to run to the other end of the train in the underground scenario to drive it from the other side once you reach the end of the route. This at least added some variation with different start and stop points and different stations you were visiting. There's a certain amount of satisfaction from just judging the distances and speed when stopping at the platforms and trying to get it just right each time.
So in terms of things I didn't like, it's way too glitchy and buggy. Personally, I think it needs a patch to fix some of the graphical and optimization issues. It really needs a map overlay. Going in and out of the menus to bring up the map of the train lines was really clunky. Also, whilst talking about the map, being able to change train line switches from the map was really useful, but the way it's implemented is terrible. There's no real-time change on the map to indicate if the switch has been changed when you press it. So it took me a while to realise that the purple line that shows up is showing the way the switch is at the moment, not how it will be once you press it. It wasn't obvious, and when you press it, it doesn't change on screen. You have to exit the menu, then go back into the menu, hover over the switch point again to confirm that it's changed. This all proves difficult when you want to change all the switches on the route you're due to go on at the start before setting off, rather than stopping and starting and changing them along the way. It really needs a save and exit button on the challenge complete screen. All you do is click continue and that automatically goes into the next challenge, which you then have to sit through the start of the next challenge before being able to hit escape to bring up the menu to navigate to the exit button. It's too much like hard work. Sometimes these simulator games feel like work, like you should be getting paid to do them, and there's a lot of concentration needed at times. I really find I have to be in the mood to play them, and if not, I just end up rage quitting if it gets to me. I do the same at work as well. It really needs music in the menus at least.
Yeah, in terms of things I didn't like, it does have very basic tutorials, I found. Just in the way that they're actually scripted. It would be nice to see these reworked and expanded, as in my experience, simulation games normally have incredibly in-depth tutorials, but this just seemed like not much effort had been put into them, which is a shame. There is lots of DLC with this game, and it can get very expensive. Dovetail seem to have a monopoly on this kind of niche part of the market, and they seem well aware of that with their pricing of the add-ons. It can definitely get a bit monotonous at times and feels like a second job. Unlike driving and plane simulators, you really are just fixed in place, obviously, and have very little freedom to do much. It would have been nice to have a few more trains and perhaps another route in the base game. There are essentially only 2 additional routes in this one, as the sand patch grade is just a rework from the previous version of the game.
So in terms of missed opportunities, Dale, did you think there were any for this?
I think it would have been nice to have some more in-game documentation, such as detailed user manuals for the trains. I'm sure they must have these sort of things in real life.
Yeah, I felt it needed a map overlay system to allow for easier and less clunky change of railway switches on the American sand patch grade, but also it would have been good for the other 2 scenarios as well. So in terms of scores, what do you think on this one?
Well, it pretty much does what it says on the tin, but is a very basic game unless you feel like pouring money into all the DLCs. It is, of course, almost completely focused on one thing, being a realistic train sim, and I think it manages that quite well. Although it does feel like the devs have been a bit lazy, and given this is the 5th game in the series, I expected a much more polished experience. Perhaps a bit of competition from other companies would be a good thing here. With all that said, it's going to be a 6 out of 10 from me.
So on the upside, it has a good level of detail for the trains, realistic and adaptive control system, and good environment and vehicle sounds. But on the other hand, the game is largely let down by its graphics and optimization issues, clunky mapping system, and lack of music. I think this boils down to a mediocre train simulation game that I may pick up again from time to time, but I really have to be in the mood for some hard graft to do so. So for me, it's a disappointingly middle of the road score of 5 out of 10. Well, guys, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Hit that bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, and we'll see you in the next one.
Five hours later.